Hi class, this is Dr. Kaufman, and this is the online video lecture for Chapter 10 of the textbook, where I'm going to be talking about cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy and the work of Aaron Beck. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, as we get ready to look through Chapter 10, I want you to pay attention to the two images on the slide right now. The one on the left is the cognitive triangle, and this is a really important concept to be able to use cognitive therapy appropriately. The idea is that we need to get the client to be able to see the relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. You'll notice the arrows on the three different parts of the triangle are two-sided. And so what that means is we aren't saying that one always occurs before the other. I'm a very thought and logic-oriented person, so when I think about what I'm experiencing in a situation, honestly, I do think my thoughts come first, and then my behaviors, and then my feelings are sort of an afterthought. But that's just for me, and sometimes my feelings do come first. Like if it's a fear response, and so I get that fear and I just go into behavior and then I can think about it, like a reaction or an instinct. For clients, it's important to help them to see that all three of these things are being experienced from moment to moment. That a behavior may happen, but the behavior is a product of the feelings, the pressures, the emotions and anxieties, and then the thoughts that lead to that emotion, that lead to that anxiety or that depression. And so when we look at those three things like they bounce off of each other, thought then feeling behavior, feeling thought behavior, behavior feeling thought, then it becomes more possible to see how these different pathologies that we treat with counseling come into the presence of a client's life. Look at the image on the right. Those lists of issues are all the issues that are the byproduct of faulty thinking, of poor behaviors and decision making, of feelings that seem to put us out of balance, and so we need to stop them. And of course, there's some that are more difficult to treat than others in that list. But if you think specifically about low self-esteem and what the thoughts that we have running through our mind do to generate the phenomena of low self-esteem, cognitive therapy is about isolating that thought, challenging it, seeing the emotion that shifts when we replace the negative thought with a positive thought, and seeing what behaviors we can use that create the presence of an improved self-esteem scenario for the client. So let's move on to the next slide. We have a quote from Aaron Beck himself. Cognitive therapy seeks to alleviate psychological stresses by correcting faulty conceptions and self-signals. By correcting erroneous beliefs, we can lower excessive reactions. Lots of wordiness in that quote, but what Aaron Beck is saying is that the psychological stress that we feel is from thinking that is not working well for us, that we are telling ourselves to feel distressed in our psyche. And so if we correct the beliefs that are damaging to us, we're going to correct the behaviors that are damaging to us. That is what Beck is talking about. If you correct one, it creates a ripple effect through the other two, thoughts, feeling, behavior, whichever one you have control over. If you shift that one in the positive direction, the dominoes start to fall. And now the things that you're hoping will happen in your life become more possible. And so the purpose of cognitive theory, the way that it sees humanity and its motivation on this earth, is that we want to survive. And we want to survive in a way that enhances our control over our life and enhances our relationships. So we want to have friends and family that have warm connections to us. We want to be in a situation where we're able to make our own decisions and preserve our autonomy over the situation and ourselves. And we also want to survive. And the reason we want to survive is because we want to be able to do some other things as well. We want to be able to be dominant in our world and keep making those choices. We also want to ensure that our race continues. There is a reproduction motive in cognitive therapy as well, is that that's what works for us, and what works for us we want to continue. There's a bit of behaviorism in there, if you can remember what we were talking about in last week's video. That if something goes well for you, the law of effect says you're going to repeat it. And cognitive theory is doing that, but with thoughts, and then the consequence of our behavior. And then the cognitive model also stresses that emotions and behaviors come from our perception of the situation, what we're thinking. So there's two different things at play in all moments that we experience. There's the thing that's happening to us, and there's the thing we think about the thing that's happening to us. And that's what we are helping our client to identify. Is it's not about what happened to you, it's about the message that you send into your mind that you accept as part of yourself now about what happened. So I always use the examples of being a graduate student because that's the place where all of you are, and I think it's relatable. If you receive a good score on a paper, then you're going to think that you're a great student, and that thought is going to go inside yourself. It's going to enhance your self-esteem. It's going to make you feel great during the following day, the following week. You're going to carry that energy into the next assignment. If you get a grade that's lower than what you were expected, the law of effects says that's not going to feel very good. And then your thought about what happens for students who get a score like that. So bad students get that score. I must be a bad student. And I'm challenging all of you today to use the idea of cognitive therapy to look at that and let that thought go. Go into the Disney Frozen zone. Let it go. It really is important because that thought isn't true. There's so many facts that contradict that good students do get low grades, and it has to do with research and preparation and thoroughness of work. And good students sometimes do not hit highest on all those levels for every assignment. And so the cognitive model would say to just regroup and get ready for the next assignment. It's a long course and there's many different weeks. And so think about the kind of thought that you're having here. There's the automatic ones, which is, oh, this is the kind of student I am. I did terrible. I did amazing. Then there's the conscious thought where you actually start to work on the thought. And this is where you're actually thinking, oh, is that true? Is that not true? Does it work for me? Does it not work for me? Is there another idea that I can select? That's a conscious thought. Then there's the metacognitive thought, which is thinking about the process of thinking. Oh, I was able to fix my thinking there. I was able to not fix my thinking there. I got really stuck there. My thinking is really working for me today. My thinking is really not working for me today. And that's metacognitive thought. And so these are central themes in the cognitive model that we use in this theory. And so you can always practice playing around with these during your day. And the more that you do that, the more natural it's going to feel to talk about these things with your future clients. And then we have the concept of schemas. This has been one of the most fascinating concepts in my career up to this point. In fact, one of the ideas that I originally thought I might do my dissertation on was about exploring schemas and how well they bend and adapt to given situations, especially when the information we're given does not reinforce the schema we had. However, that would have been very difficult to research as a student who doesn't have funding from someone to do some crazy technology-based brain scan kind of research. And so I chose something else. Now, let's talk about what a schema is. This is the word for a core belief. And a core belief is something that explains the thoughts that are actually happening for a person in all related moments. So if you have a schema of, let's look at the list of the adaptive schemas in table 10.1. I'm a survivor, okay? So a person might experience a car accident, or they might experience a abusive relationship, or they might be fired from their job, okay? All of these things are bad things that you don't want to have be part of your day. Now, if they look at how are they going to pick up the pieces of that unfortunate scenario? Well, I need to get a new job. I need to get my car repaired. I need to get out of this situation. And then you follow that thought and ask, well, why do you need to do that? Why do you need to do that? And then you start asking a different question. What does that mean about you? If you do that, what does that mean about you? And eventually they answer a couple questions and you keep going layer by layer by layer. And all three of those people, they might say, because I can't give up now, because I have to keep going. What does that mean about you if you have to keep going? I'm a survivor. And that one belief explains all the behaviors in situations like that one. That is how they see themselves. That is the core structure of their identity inside their mind, inside the cognitive world they've constructed about themselves. I'm a survivor. I'm trustworthy. I'm lovable. These are great schemas that build a person up. If you look at the right column, I have to be perfect. I talk with students all the time who had a 4.0 for a long time, and maybe they got a lower grade on one paper, or maybe they forgot to do a DQ and so on time, so they get a 3 out of 5. And a 3 out of 5 isn't a big deal, actually, because the whole course is 1,000 points. So losing 2 points on something like that is not going to hurt your grade. But if you have this idea of perfection, then that's a huge insult. And so when I'm talking about the math, that you have the exact same grade right now as you did before those 2 points, and the important part is to remember DQs are due on Saturday and then on Monday. But the student is thinking, I'm not perfect anymore. I can't get 1,000 out of 1,000, and so I'm not as good a student anymore, which means I'm a fake, right? I'm a fake perfect student. And so I'm using another student example. If you are relating to some of these ideas, then maybe take my guidance and try to figure out, what does cognitive theory challenge you to do as you learn about these theories. I think it's important to remember that clients aren't perfect, counselors aren't perfect, instructors aren't perfect, and students aren't perfect. We all make mistakes. We're all fallible. And these schemas serve us well when we're able to interact with our world in a way that doesn't expect us to be unrealistic. So it's important to have a positive core belief, because that helps us to motivate our behavior to keep trying and to keep pushing and to keep doing the right things and believe that it's going to be worthwhile in the end. And that's what we try to teach our clients in therapy. Schemas are a really big idea in this approach, and they rely on our ability to identify a few things up front. We have to teach the client how to identify their beliefs and their automatic thoughts. A belief is what we think about a situation. A belief, like a religion or like a faith system, a belief is the value that we assign to a given situation once we've seen the information we're given. So it could be an assumption, a rule, or an attitude. A belief could be, this is an easy course or this is a tough course. A belief could be, Dr. Kaufman is a teacher that makes the class easy to pass, or Dr. Kaufman is a teacher who makes the class very difficult to pass. And that belief is going to inform your behavior, and it's going to inform your emotions. You're going to either feel supported or persecuted. You're going to feel successful and happy, or stressed and sad or angry or frustrated. And the automatic thought is the immediate thought you have when a situation happens. I snapped my fingers just now, and that's how quick an automatic thought happens. There's no gap in between stimulus, response, thought, right? It's boom, boom, boom. The automatic thought comes into our mind, and that's our starting point for any situation. It's swift, and it judges the situation to give us a chance to react. And there's essentially 3 types of automatic thoughts, which we're going to review from Judith Beck, daughter of Aaron Beck, on the following slide. And I've put the lighter positive color version and the redder oranger negative colored version. So if you look row to row of these hexagons, these are the good and the bad versions. So let's look at the good version. These automatic thoughts are healthy thoughts, which line up with the evidence. And then the negative version of that same automatic thought is a distorted thought that challenges the evidence and doesn't agree. And then the second row is an accurate conclusion, but it's distorted. And then the good version of that is an accurate thought that is reasonable and not distorted. It is consistent with the reality in front of us. And then the last row, the good version, is an accurate automatic thought that gives us a healthy path for moving forward. And then the bad version of that is an accurate thought, but it's dysfunctional and it does not present us with a good path for moving forward. And so it's important to understand that even with automatic thoughts, they can be faulty and dysfunctional, or they can be healthy and well-adjusted. And if we notice a pattern of certain kinds of automatic thoughts in our clients as they share with us, we can challenge them, we can review them, we can practice finding the other path that the client is not naturally accustomed to walking themselves through. And that's the benefit of doing cognitive therapy, is we're teaching the client to adjust the thought processes, which has an impact on adjusting in a positive way the emotional system, and it has a chance to alter the behaviors in a productive direction. And so it's a trickle-down effect. We access the thought, get to the feeling, get to the behavior. And again, we have schemas. Schemas are like the lens with which we see the world. So I'm wearing glasses right now. They help me to see. I see things a little bit different right now. And the schema is the adjustment. So this is naturally what I see. And it could be a bit blurry. I'm staring at screens all day and doing presentations all day. And then when I put my glasses on, it shifts my reality and it gives me an opportunity to see things more clearly, or if my glasses are not right, it gives me an opportunity to see them less effectively. So let's look at some examples here. At the top of the image, we have the event and then the schema and then the colored lines coming out. So a schema is like a prism. It causes a refraction of the light and it breaks the light into its isolated colors. And so we want to have those positive colors in our schemas. These schemas are our core beliefs. Remember, they're shaped by our experiences and how we've come to view ourselves functioning in our reality and our surroundings and our environment. So if we see ourselves as effective, good, smart, intelligent, worthwhile, those schemas are going to be effective for us. It's going to help us to problem solve and believe in ourselves to move forward through a bad situation. If the schema says, I'm worthless, I'm worthwhile, nobody loves me, I have no skills, I am incapable, then the colors that we get out of that prism are going to be the gloomy blues and purples and dark ones that lead to depression and feeling stuck. And so the goal here is to isolate the schema in our conversation and help the client to look in their present to find evidence that says this schema is actually a lie. This negative schema that shifts me into my bad version of life is a lie that has been created by other people or other situations I actually had no control over, and I can actually believe in myself now. And let's practice doing that during our conversations and counseling. And so here's one of my favorite worksheets that I do with my clients in order to identify some schemas. So we start with an idea, and it has to be a thought or an automatic thought that they have put into words during the session. And I will put that in the worksheet with them. I'll give them the worksheet, give them some markers or a pen, and I'll say, please write that thought down. We're going to practice playing around with this thought. And then we'll practice doing this. There's enough room on the page to do 3 or 4 layers. I'll often have them do 7 or 8. So I'll tell them to skip a few before they write again. But we'll keep doing the question. So let's use the example of the perfect student, right, who lost a couple points and is catastrophizing the fact that now they're in a bad place in this class when ultimately they still have a 99% in the class. And so they're going to say, I lost some points and that's unfair. Okay, so if that's true, then what does that say about you? It means that I'm not being treated fairly in the class. Okay, so write that down. If that's true, if that's the case, what does that mean to you? It means that I should be treated better in the class. And that's like, okay, so then we're talking more about the class than about the person. So as a counselor, I have to do a little bit of troubleshooting with those questions and get the focus back on the thought as it relates to the person and their own place in the situation, not the situation as it relates to the person. I know that's complicated, but just pause that and think about it for a few seconds and then continue with my conversation here. So then I'm helping the student to try to realize that they need to look at themselves as part of the situation, not the situation as that they're part of themselves. So losing some points means that, you know, there's something that I didn't notice, right? And then if there's something that you didn't notice, if that's true, what does that mean to you? That means I'm not trying hard enough. If I'm not trying hard enough, why is that a problem? Because I'm not a good student. If that's true, then why is then I'm not as good as I thought I was. And if that's true, what does that mean to you? Well, I think of myself in terms of how I'm doing as a student. Okay, so if that's true, then what does that mean to you? Well, if I'm a bad student, then I'm a bad person. Now, that's just one example of how the downward arrow technique can work. Because obviously that student is a great student. And losing 2 points on a DQ because life got busy does not mean they're a bad person at all. It means their life was busy. And that's all it means. It has no implication on the personhood of the individual. And so I'm using this as an example because hopefully you can relate to some times where things didn't quite go your way and you had to figure out a way to think about it that lets it be real. It's not a lie to yourself, but also that it doesn't threaten your personhood, that you're able to continue moving on forward from that point. And that's very important in this theory, because if we let small mistakes become catastrophes, then we're always doing damage control in our life. And we're always stuck into a distorted process of thought, feeling, and behavior. And the goal is to overcome those illogical beliefs, to let ourselves operate in reality. A healthy person does a kind of information processing that allows them to meet their goals and survive and be social. Whereas other forms of thought persecute the person into a box, into a bubble where they are less than and have not. And they're stuck not fulfilling their drive, their motive, or even their destiny. You know, they're stuck with these labels in their mind, pretending that they're this awful person when they're not at all. They're just a human being, flawed and trying to learn, you know, doing their best to learn with their time on this earth. That's a lot of what cognitive theory is about, is learning how to think, learning how to understand our emotions, and learning how those things come together to create our behaviors, and how we believe in ourselves, the schemas that we use change the kind of life that we are living. So let's talk about cognitive, distorted, dysfunctional thinking here for a second. There's 3 things to think about, 3 clusters. One is cognitive distortions. I'd encourage all of you to find a worksheet online of cognitive distortions, or look through the chapter in the textbook and snap a picture with your phone and save it in your online storage so that you have a worksheet or a handout of cognitive distortions. You want to be able to identify those and use those as key terms and teach your clients what those key terms are. All or nothing thinking, black and white thinking, reaction formation, sublimation, catastrophizing. These are the kinds of terms that you want to understand when using this theory with clients. Because if you can teach the clients mistakes they make in their thinking, and they're able to put a word to that, that lets them know that it's not just them. And that lets them know that there are ways to fix those kinds of mistakes. Just like fixing a mistake in a math problem. The cognitive triad is negative views about the self, the world, and the future. So I think I'm terrible for myself, I think the world is terrible, and I think the world will continue to be terrible, and my future will be terrible. These are the negative places that thoughts take root. And if you believe the future is going to be terrible, you don't try in the present. If you believe the world is terrible and you have no impact, you do not try. If you think yourself is terrible and there's no fixing that, then you do not engage in things that build yourself up. And then cognitive specificity is a specific distortion of how you're perceiving a situation. So you may be pretty healthy, but let's go back to the student that we did the downward arrow technique with. They may think they're brilliant. And then the distorted thinking only relates to mistakes they make in the classroom, because that's the only part that makes them feel smart or inferior. Everywhere else in life, everyone loves the effort that they do. They have a great work ethic. They're personable. They're great to be around. They're fun. They're funny. They have good comedy and humor, and they're supportive of other people. So there's nothing wrong with them anywhere else, but they have a specific hang-up about how they perform in a classroom. And so that's something that we'll be working with our clients on a lot. You know, we'll be working with people who only have a hang up with their job, only have a hang up with their marriage or their relationship, only have a hang up with their role as a student, only have a hang up related to their amount of drugs or alcohol they consume or other addictions. And so there could be a specific value that makes the cognitive hang-ups exist in their mind, but everything else in life seems to be functioning pretty well. So that's something to remember in terms of dysfunction. Now on this worksheet, we're talking about cost-benefit analysis. It's basically like a pros and cons list, but we're able to do some therapy things with it in order to make good decisions or convince a person that a certain behavior needs to continue or stop. And that also is a cognitive behavioral worksheet. Now let's talk about the nature of therapy in cognitive theory. You do use formal and informal assessments. You do use scales like the Beck Depression Inventory or the Beck Anxiety Inventory. You want to assign numbers to the problems, and you want to track them from week to week, month to month, so that you can see the progress of the client in a quantifiable way. Another thing to remember is that we are using collaborative empiricism. So we are emphasizing a scientific approach. That's why we use data and numbers to explain how bad a situation is going. One benefit of that is when we use a Beck Depression Inventory, for example, we are teaching the client about the behaviors that define depression. So we may ask a client, are you depressed? Yes. Or a client may come up to us and say, Dr. Kaufman, I think I'm depressed. But a lot of times our clients don't actually know what that means. They don't know that you have X number of depression criteria over the last 30 days and that the severity is moderate or severe. They don't understand the DSM-5. They don't understand what it takes to diagnose major depressive disorder. And so in therapy, when we ask them these questions about how often do you stay in bed without getting out of bed for most of the day? How often do you eat large amounts of food in an unhealthy way in a small amount of time? How often do you barely eat anything over the period of the day? How often do you find things unenjoyable that used to be enjoyable? How often do you engage in sexual activity or avoid the opportunity to engage in sexual activity or other activities that used to be enjoyable? How often do you engage in social interaction with others? These are things that help us as counselors to understand the behaviors that are going into that depression diagnosis. And we teach our clients about those behaviors. And if you don't want to be depressed, get dressed at the beginning of the day, pay attention to your hygiene, eat healthy, take advantage of opportunities to meet with other people in social settings, get out of the house, complete some tasks that normally you would avoid. And then just like that, now you're working on the depression behaviors. It's very hard to still feel as depressed when you're so effective in your day. And you become that effective in your day by exhibiting the behaviors which impact the thoughts, which impact the way you feel about yourself. And so we have the cognitive triangle. So we just taught the client what depression actually is, the way counselors see it. And then we've taught them how to short circuit that process so they are not living the life of a depressed person anymore. Very interesting how that can work in cognitive therapy. Now, the role of the client is to be the student and learn the concepts of cognitive therapy from their counselor. The counselor then is the expert who delivers the inventories, delivers the questions, scores them, and talks about the outcome and the result, but also gives feedback and helps the client to complete these worksheets and use the key terms correctly and understand what a schema is as best as the client possibly can. And the goals are to change the faulty thought processes and to modify the beliefs so that the client is able to exhibit behaviors in their world that solve their problems. And so by doing therapy, we're giving them feedback and saying, this worked, this didn't work. How did you do this? What does that mean? How did you feel? What kind of behavior followed? Were there any consequences? Does this set of choices and thinking work for you or not work for you? What can we change for next week? And that's what the counselor is consistently doing with high energy throughout the whole process of the session. So when we're doing a counseling session, there's 3 stages of what we're doing. We're going to review the behaviors and work on it, helping the client prepare to activate those behaviors during their week. We're going to focus on the thought processes and their relationship to the emotions and the behavior. Then we're going to work on the belief about themselves, the core value belief, the schema. And we're going to work on improving those so that the client feels good about what they're doing in their life from week to week, and that you see improvement and you're tracking it because maybe the Beck Depression Inventory is getting a lower and lower number each week, indicating the depression goes down. You're also going to need a strong working relationship with the client because there's lots of scoring, there's lots of confronting and correcting and lots of explaining to the client. And you want the client to completely buy into the idea of working with you, because there's lots of concepts. It's a very hard theory to use with people who are not accustomed to learning a lot of information. And so you want to teach them about how counseling works up front. You want to talk to them about, for about 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to do this. For about 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to do that. We're going to do this for 5 minutes, and then we're going to wrap up for about 10 minutes. And then you're giving the client the idea of what counseling is going to be as they work with you. And then it occurs in phases, and you want to talk about the kinds of tasks you're going to give, because this approach actually uses homework. You are definitely expecting the client to be completing some things in between counseling sessions. So the first third of the session is going to be about a guided discovery. The next third is about the self-advisory role the client has, so the ability for themselves to deliver feedback during the week to themselves. And then we're going to talk about how the cognitive process is working. How much does the client believe in it? What are the things they're struggling with? How can we make that feel better to them? And on the right side, I have another worksheet, the belief-driven formulation, where we take a situation, we take the core belief the client thinks they have in that situation, and then we break it down, the thought, feeling, behavior, and how your body is responding to being in that situation and believing a certain way. Right? And an easy thing that we can do here is standing in line for a long time at the grocery store and the line doesn't seem to be moving. That's the situation. You know, my time is valuable, core belief. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm stuck in this line. And then the emotion is frustrated. The behavior is antsy and fidgety and maybe a little angry when the clerk brings you up and it's your turn and they ask, how are you doing today? Did you find everything okay? And your bodily sensations, maybe your muscle tension, elevated temperature, eyes are locked in a glaring kind of way. Now, my time is valuable, but I know the grocery store can take a long time. These people are people too. Very different core belief. Thought process, I don't need to be upset. I'm eventually going to get to the front of the line. Emotions, calm. Behaviors, just standing in line, thinking about what I'm going to do after I leave the grocery store. Bodily sensation, calm, regular breathing rate, heart rate the same, stable, and not irritated at all. Very different turn of events there, just by changing the core belief about what that situation means to me. In one, it's internalized. It feels like a personal insult. The other one, it's just something that happens in reality, and I'm a passenger on that ride. I have no control. I can't change it. I can't prevent it. And eventually, I'm going to move past it in about 20 minutes. This is not going to be a problem for me anymore. So I'll just endure it and move on with my day. So that's an example of how that worksheet would work. And then as the client completes the worksheet themselves and gives you their answers, you can talk about errors. You can give them a chance to point out some errors you're making. After all, this is their counseling. So if they think something's not going to work for them, they have the right to ask you to change it. You can also talk about interventions and how you need to time them correctly. And you want to get that feedback from the client. You want it to be their process. You want it to work for them. Now, I've shown you a lot of worksheets that illustrate some of these interventions already, but look at how many techniques just from the textbook and off the top of my head. And I created this slide for you. And I want you to understand that these are all things that a cognitive theorist is going to use in almost every session if we can fit it in, especially the ones that are just the conversational process. We can't do all the worksheets every single section, although there are a lot of worksheets. I want you to look specifically at Socratic questioning. This is just about asking the client why. I did this, why? I thought this, why? This kind of thing makes me believe this about myself, why? And you want to be a little bit more varied and a little bit more intelligent and intellectual than that. But cognitive theory really is about finding the ins and outs of a person's thought process. So if you can, take the time, look back in the textbook about what Murdoch had to say about Socratic questioning, and even find a journal article about this and use that as one of your references for your paper this week. It's really important to understand how important a Socratic dialogue can be in a counseling process. It's really an important thing to understand. Even if you're using a different theory, we are still engaging in a Socratic dialogue the way the ancient Greeks conceptualized it, and Socrates and his disciples, The Socratic questioning is a philosophical principle that helps us to collect information and understand the way we connect with our surrounding world. Now, this theory obviously is going to prove very effective in research because a lot of it is measurable. And even the things that are thought-oriented, with our worksheets and our scales, like the Beck Depression Inventory, we make them measurable. So research generally supports the effectiveness of cognitive therapy, and because of that, you can find lots of published work. Now, if you can't find articles specifically about cognitive therapy for this class, please feel free to use cognitive behavioral therapy, because the searches for cognitive therapy is going to send those into your results list as well. And they're very close to the same thing. Cognitive behavioral therapy puts an additional premium of behaviorism interacting with the cognitive processes that I've described in this video. And that's fine, because behaviors are part of that triangle as well. Thought, feeling, and behavior. So that's just fine for what we're doing in this course. Cognitive therapy needs to be adapted sometimes. It has a very individualistic and results for the person focus instead of the impact on the collective, and sort of the impact on families, the impact on the system, the impact on the community. This is a good theory to use for people who need to make changes in their life and only their life. And so if you're using this theory with certain cultures, you want to make sure that you're being culturally competent and having conversations with the client about if this is working for them. And even before, when you send them with their homework to try something out, spend some minutes talking about if that's an appropriate goal. Give them the chance to tell you, no, I actually think we need to change it a little bit because I need to think about what happens to my elderly parents who live with me, or what happens to the impact I have on my siblings if I go all in on my own behaviors and thoughts and I disregard them. We don't want to disregard important parts of our client's life. And so just find a way to be mindful and modify the cognitive therapy approach so that it will work with your client in the way they live their life. That is not an unreasonable expectation at all. And so, finally, this is not the triangle because we've included the bodily sensations. It is called the cross-sectional formulation, but I want you to look at the relationship between thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and the body sensations. If you can pay attention to what you are experiencing inside yourself from moment to moment in all four of those ways, you're going to have great feedback to be able to find the best way to respond to a given situation. So you just want to remember, thought, feeling, behavior, and body sensation, they're connected processes and structures that we want to understand our schemas, and we want to be able to have positive ones that give us self-efficacy so that we believe in ourselves and we try in our world, and that we're able to look at our situation, see what is working and repeat it, see what is not working and discontinue it, so that we look at our thoughts and keep the ones that work well for us. We keep our emotions and we notice the thoughts and behaviors that led to those feelings existing. And we look at our behaviors and we look at our decision making and see which ones work for us. And those are the things we continue doing, and that we learn about how all of those positive things impact the other part of our experience. Thought, feeling, behavior. All right. Now the next video that I create will be on Chapter 11 in Reality Therapy and the work of William Glasser. I hope that you found this video about cognitive theory, the work of Aaron Beck, and the use of the cognitive triangle and other CBT worksheets useful. And I'm looking forward to reading your papers for those of you who have decided after watching this video to use cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy for the case study assignment. Thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoyed this video and move on to enjoy the next video once it becomes available. Have a great rest of your day.